In the annals of human history, few names evoke such visceral terror as Caligula. Yet before he became Rome's most notorious madman, before the blood-soaked orgies and the systematic destruction of an empire's soul, he was simply Gaius, a beloved child whose laughter once echoed through military camps, whose tiny boots earned him a nickname that would become synonymous with absolute evil. Our tale begins not in the marble halls of Rome, but in the muddy camps along the Rhine frontier, where a 2-year-old boy named Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus toddled among battle-hardened legionaries. The soldiers, charmed by this miniature figure dressed in perfect military regalia, complete with tiny caligae, the hobnailed boots of Roman infantry, christened him Caligula, Little Boot. His father Germanicus was Rome's golden prince, a military genius beloved by both soldiers and citizens, the heir apparent to an empire. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, carried the blood of Augustus himself. Young Caligula seemed destined for greatness, born into a dynasty that had conquered the known world. But destiny, as the Romans knew well, is a cruel mistress. When Caligula was 7, his world shattered. Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances in Antioch. Many whispered of poison, of jealous rivals who feared his popularity. The boy's mother, consumed by grief and rage, pointed accusing fingers at Emperor Tiberius. Her defiance would cost her everything. One by one, Tiberius eliminated Caligula's family. His mother, exiled to a barren island, starved herself to death. His brothers, imprisoned and broken, died in captivity. Only young Caligula survived, summoned at 17 to live with the very man who had destroyed his family, on the island of Capri, where Tiberius had retreated into a world of paranoia and depravity. For 6 years, Caligula learned to smile while his soul screamed. He watched, he waited. He survived by becoming the perfect courtier to his family's murderer, all while something dark and terrible grew within him, a cancer of the spirit that would soon metastasize into unimaginable horror. March 16th, 37 AD. Tiberius was dead, some say by Caligula's own hand, and Rome erupted in celebration. The 24-year-old heir apparent entered the capital to scenes of unprecedented joy. Citizens lined the streets, throwing flowers, chanting his name. Here was Germanicus's son, come to restore the glory his father had promised. And for 7 magnificent months, it seemed their prayers had been answered. Caligula freed political prisoners, recalled exiles, and distributed generous bonuses to citizens and soldiers alike. He staged spectacular gladiatorial games and chariot races that dazzled the masses. The young emperor appeared magnanimous, prudent, beloved. Rome had found its savior, but beneath the surface, something was stirring. Something that would soon transform this golden prince into history's most terrifying cautionary tale about the corruption of absolute power. October 37 AD. A mysterious illness struck the emperor down with devastating force. For weeks, Caligula lay near death, racked by fever and delirium. The empire held its breath. When he finally emerged from his sickbed, those closest to him noticed something had fundamentally changed. Modern medical experts theorize about what might have afflicted him: viral encephalitis that could have inflamed his brain, temporal lobe epilepsy that might have triggered hypersexuality and religious ecstasy, or perhaps the cumulative effects of childhood trauma finally manifesting in a complete psychological break. The lead pipes that carried water to Roman palaces may have slowly poisoned his mind with heavy metals, while the genetic legacy of the inbred Julio-Claudian dynasty could have predisposed him to madness. But whatever the cause, the man who recovered was no longer the beloved prince who had fallen ill. In his place stood something else entirely, something that would soon reveal appetites that defied human comprehension. The transformation was gradual at first, like watching a beautiful fresco slowly peel away to reveal the rotting wall beneath. Caligula began hosting dinner parties where he would publicly describe the sexual prowess of senators' wives, women he had personally tested. He forced aristocrats to run beside his chariot for miles during policy discussions, reducing Rome's elite to panting, humiliated servants. But these were mere appetites compared to what was coming. The emperor began appearing in public dressed as various gods: Mercury, Apollo, Venus. He constructed a bridge between his palace and the temple of Jupiter so he could, in his words, meet with the deity as an equal. Citizens were forced to worship him as a living god, while he spoke casually of conversations with the moon goddess Diana. And then there was Incitatus. Caligula's favorite horse lived better than most Roman citizens. Incitatus dined from an ivory manger in a marble stable, wore collars of precious gems, and slept on purple blankets worth more than a senator's annual income. The emperor threw dinner parties in the horse's honor, where guests were expected to toast the animal's health and discuss its opinions on matters of state. But the ultimate insult to Roman dignity came when Caligula announced his intention to make Incitatus a consul, one of Rome's highest elected officers. Whether this was madness, calculated humiliation, or both, the message was clear. In Caligula's Rome, even a beast was more worthy of respect than the Senate. Yet this bizarre theater was merely the prelude to horrors that would make a mockery of human decency itself. The murders began slowly, almost casually. A rival here, a critic there. Deaths that could be explained away as necessary political housekeeping. But as Caligula's paranoia deepened, the killings accelerated into something approaching industrial efficiency. He forced parents to watch their children's executions, then invited them to dinner afterward, expecting them to laugh and joke as if nothing had happened. Those who showed grief were immediately marked for death. At gladiatorial games, when the supply of condemned criminals ran low, Caligula would gesture to entire sections of the audience, ordering them thrown to the lions for his amusement. The emperor developed what he called artistic methods of execution. He would have victims slowly sawed in half, or fed piece by piece to wild animals while still alive. He took particular pleasure in psychological torture, promising mercy, then revealing it was merely another layer of cruelty. But perhaps most chilling was his complete emotional detachment from these atrocities. Contemporary accounts describe him laughing during executions, making jokes about the victim's final words, treating human suffering as entertainment designed specifically for his pleasure. By 40 AD, Rome had become a city of whispers and shadows. No one was safe, not senators, not citizens, not even members of the imperial family. Caligula's paranoia had metastasized into a reign of terror that consumed everything in its path. He drained the imperial treasury on increasingly bizarre spectacles, constructing a 3-mile bridge of ships across the Bay of Naples so he could ride across it dressed as Neptune, declaring war on the sea itself and ordering his soldiers to collect seashells as spoils of victory. The empire's finances collapsed under the weight of his megalomaniacal fantasies. When the money ran out, Caligula simply seized property from wealthy citizens, often after having them executed on trumped-up charges. He introduced new taxes on lawsuits, marriages, and prostitution. Citizens were forced to leave their estates to the emperor in their wills. Those who refused found themselves dying under mysterious circumstances. The man who had once been Rome's beloved prince had become a cancer eating the empire from within, a living embodiment of power's capacity to corrupt absolutely. But even the most absolute power has limits, and Caligula was about to discover his. Among his Praetorian Guard served a man named Cassius Chaerea, a veteran officer whom Caligula delighted in humiliating. The emperor mocked Chaerea's high voice, gave him obscene passwords to recite, and forced him to perform increasingly degrading tasks. But Chaerea was no ordinary victim. He was a soldier who had served with honor, who remembered what Rome had been before this madman's reign of terror. As Caligula's cruelties escalated, Chaerea began reaching out to other conspirators, senators who had watched their colleagues disappear, citizens who had seen their city transformed into a charnel house, anyone who still remembered that Rome had once stood for something greater than one man's twisted appetites. The plot they hatched was simple, direct, and absolutely necessary for the survival of civilization itself. In January 24th, 41 AD, the Palatine Games were in full swing, and Caligula was in his element, surrounded by sycophants, drunk on wine and power, reveling in the adoration of crowds who cheered because they were too terrified to do otherwise. As the emperor made his way through the underground corridors connecting the theater to his palace, Cassius Chaerea and his fellow conspirators were waiting. They had chosen their moment carefully, away from the crowds, away from the Germanic bodyguards, in a narrow passage where there would be no escape. When Chaerea asked for the day's password, a routine military courtesy, Caligula gave his response. It was the signal the conspirators had been waiting for. The first blow came from Chaerea himself, a sword thrust to the shoulder that sent the emperor to his knees. Then the others closed in, 30 stab wounds in total, a deliberate echo of Julius Caesar's assassination. But unlike his illustrious ancestor, Caligula died not as a tragic hero, but as a monster finally brought to justice. The conspirators didn't stop with the emperor. They hunted down his wife Caesonia and their infant daughter, ensuring that no trace of his bloodline would survive to threaten Rome again. The palace ran red with blood, but for the first time in years, it was the blood of tyrants rather than innocents. When news of Caligula's death spread through Rome, the reaction was not grief, but relief. The collective exhale of a city that had been holding its breath for 3 years. Citizens emerged from their homes like survivors of a plague, blinking in sunlight they had forgotten existed. The Senate briefly considered restoring the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard had other plans. They found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain in the palace and proclaimed him emperor. The imperial system would continue, but with a ruler who understood that power without restraint leads inevitably to destruction. Today, tourists walk through the ruins of Caligula's palace on the Palatine Hill, taking selfies where senators once cowered in terror. The marble corridors that echoed with screams now host guided tours and school groups. Time has a way of domesticating even the most horrific chapters of human history. But Caligula's story endures not as ancient history, but as an eternal warning. In every age, in every society, there are those who would trade freedom for the promise of order, who would elevate leaders beyond the reach of law or conscience. Caligula shows us where that path leads, not to greatness, but to a darkness so complete that even a horse becomes more worthy of respect than human dignity itself. The boy who once charmed soldiers with his tiny boots became a monster who nearly destroyed the greatest empire the world had ever known. His reign lasted less than 4 years, but its lessons echo across millennia. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and sometimes the only cure for tyranny is the blade of those brave enough to wield it. In the end, Caligula's greatest achievement may have been teaching Rome and history that no one, no matter how powerful, is beyond the reach of justice. Even emperors can bleed, even gods can die, and sometimes that's the only way civilization survives.